I'm going to read a story from this book to you, The Fairy Doll and Other Tales from the Doll's House by Rumer Godden. Ready? This is a novel written about dolls in a doll's house. The chief person in it is Tottie Plantagenet, a small Dutch doll. Dutch dolls are scarce now, but Tottie was made a long time ago when they were plentiful and sold in every shop that had toys for sale. And large ones cost a penny, the middle size a halfpenny, and very small ones like Tottie were sold for a farthing each. At present she lived in the nursery of two little girls called Emily and Charlotte Dane. I say at present because Tottie had lived a long while. Once she had lived with two other little girls who were Emily and Charlotte's great-grandmother and their great-great-aunt Laura. How strange that a little farthing doll should last so long. Tottie was made of wood, and it was good wood. She liked to think sometimes of the tree of whose wood she was made, of its strength and of the sap that ran through it and made it bud and put out leaves every spring and summer. That kept it standing through the winter storms and wind. A very little of that tree is in me, said Tottie. I am a little of that tree. She liked to think of it. She was made of that wood, neatly jointed at the hips and shoulders and sockets. She had sockets for elbows and knees, with a sturdy inch-wide yoke for shoulders, and a round little head with glossy painted hair. She had glossy pink cheeks, and her eyes were painted with bright, firm paint, blue and very determined. Emily and Charlotte had chosen two other dolls to be Tottie's father and mother. Their names were Mr. Plantagenet and Mrs. Plantagenet, but Mrs. Plantagenet had another name, and that was Birdie. Of course, Tottie knew, just as you and I know, that Mr. and Mrs. Plantagenet were not her real father and mother, that she had no real father and mother, unless it were that felled tree of wood, of whose wood she was made. She knew that, just as she knew that her little brother Apple, the doll they had given her for a little brother, was made from plush, which is kind of velvet, and Darner, the doll's house dog, had a backbone made from a darning needle. If you have ever played at Fathers and Mothers, and of course you have played at Fathers and Mothers, you will remember what a very good feeling it is. That was exactly the feeling between Tottie and Mr. and Mrs. Plantagenet, Birdie and her little brother Apple, and Darner the dog. It is an anxious, sometimes dangerous thing to be a doll. Dolls cannot choose, they can only be chosen. They cannot do, they can only be done by. Children who do not understand this often do wrong things, and then the dolls are hurt and abused and lost. And when this happens, dolls cannot speak, nor do anything except be hurt and abused and lost. If you have any dolls, you should remember that. Listen to the story of Mr. Plantagenet. Before he was Mr. Plantagenet, for a long while he was hurt and abused and lost. He was a delicate little doll, rather larger than Tottie, with a china face and brown glass eyes and real brown hair. He was a boy doll, and he always said he remembered once being dressed in a kilt as a Highlander, with toy bagpipes stuck to his hand with hard, painful glue. Painful when you try to get it off. He was bought for some children, not, I'm glad to say, Emily and Charlotte, quite other children, who took no care of him at all. It was they who dragged the bagpipes off and took some of the painted skin off the palm of his hand as well, and tore his clothes off too, and let their puppy bite his foot until it looked half nibbled. One of the boys drew a mustache on his little top lip with an indelible pencil. Indelible means it can never come off. And then they threw him into the cold, dark toy cupboard, where he lay for weeks and months, and might have lain for years if they had not been ordered to tidy the toy cupboard because children were coming to tea. As it was, they left him lying on the floor under the table, and Emily, who was one of the visitors, nearly trod on him. "Oh, I'm sorry," cried Emily, but nobody seemed to think it mattered. "What a dear little doll," said Emily, picking him up. "Who is he? Whom does he belong to?" He did not seem to belong to anyone. She noticed that his eyes were filled with dust. The children said Emily could have him, and she wrapped him up in her handkerchief and took him home. She and Charlotte saw at once that he was made to be a little man doll. They sponged the dust and glue off him with hot water and dried him carefully, and though the mustache would not come off, they knitted him a sock for his spoilt foot and put plaster on the palm of his hurt hand. And their mother made him a check flannel suit and a blue shirt and a tie of red silk ribbon. Emily cut him tiny newspapers out of the real ones to read. "I like him with a mustache," said Emily. "It makes him look more like Mr. Plantagenet," said Charlotte. He could still not quite believe he was Mr. Plantagenet. He was still easily made afraid of being hurt or abused again. Really, you might have thought that Toddy was the father and he was the child, but there are real fathers like that. Mrs. Plantagenet was not quite right in the head. There was something in her head that rattled. Charlotte thought it might be beads, and it was true that the something made a gay sound like bright beads touching together. She was altogether gay and light, being made of cheap celluloid, but all the same nicely molded and jointed and painted. She came to Charlotte on a cracker at a party. Yes, Mrs. Plantagenet started life as part of a cracker, to which she was fastened by silver tinsel. She had been dressed in blue and green feathers. At first they had not thought she was anything more than part of the cracker. First Charlotte kept her on the cracker, then off the cracker. Then one day she decided to dress her and pull the feathers off. The feathers were glued on Mrs. Plantagenet, and here was her difference from Mr. Plantagenet. The glue coming off did not hurt her at all. It came off easily with hot water, leaving not a trace, and her body only gave out a warm celluloid smell and turned even more pink. "There is something brave about this little doll," said Emily. "I don't usually like celluloid dolls." "Nor do I," said Charlotte, "but I like her." Emily made Mrs. Plantagenet a red skirt with blue rick-rack braid on the hem, a blue blouse with red spots. The spots were pin dots, but they looked large as buttons to Mrs. Plantagenet. "I think she likes them large and bright," said Emily. They sewed her hair, which was fluffy yellow cotton, into a bun. But Emily thought again and let the hair out of the bun, loosed and fly away. "I think she was wishing we would let it fly away like that," said Charlotte. "I think she likes her hair." They put her next to Mr. Plantagenet, and they seemed to suit one another at once. They seemed to suit Toddy, too. Toddy had on a little apron that was embroidered with red daisies. Both Mr. and Mrs. Plantagenet thought she looked the very pattern of a nice small wooden girl. They were to think even more of her later. "We must get Mr. Plantagenet a walking stick," said Emily, "and Mrs. Plantagenet must have a hat with a tiny feather." There was still something of the cracker and feather look about Mrs. Plantagenet, as there was still something of the dark toy cupboard about Mr. Plantagenet. "But Toddy had been ours always," said Emily. "Even before always," said Charlotte. As for Apple, there were no fears for him. Come fog, come fine, no one could be unkind to Apple. He was as big as Emily's thumb, plump and made of warm plush, colored pink-brown. He felt nice, and he was nice, with chunky little arms and legs and sewn-in dimples and a wig of brown darning wool hair. Perhaps it was the darning wool that made Darner so fond of him. Apple wore a buster suit, scarlet felt trousers, and a white cambric blouse, white socks, and red felt shoes that were fastened with the smallest of small pearl buttons you can imagine. No one ever saw Apple without exclaiming, "What a little love of a doll!" Toddy and Mrs. Plantagenet felt that too, though they knew how naughty he was. Bertie, Mrs. Plantagenet, felt it, but she did not know that he was ever naughty. She only loved him. You had to be very careful how you touched Darner, because he had a prick at his head end, and it was his darning needle backbone, and it made him difficult to handle. The rest of him was clipped wool, gone a little gray with London grime over pipe cleaner legs. Emily and Charlotte used to take him in his turn as they took the rest of the family to the park, where he liked to be stood in the shelter of a fallen leaf. If it were autumn and there were fallen leaves, so that he could bristle at other real-sized dogs. He also liked staying at home. That was the trouble. There was no home. Chapter 2. The shortage of doll houses was acute. There were a few in the toy shops, but they were very expensive and made of cheap papier-mâché or plywood. Not worth the money, said the children's father. They wouldn't last any time. I want one to last, said Mr. Plantagenet with a catch in his breath. I want one to last for always. More than anything in the world, Mr. Plantagenet wanted a home. One that will shut. One that will last. Do you think they will ever buy a house for us? He asked. Being a doll, he could not say. Do you think we shall ever buy a house? He had to wait until Emily or Charlotte, or Emily and Charlotte's father, had the idea of buying one for him. Even if they had the idea, these days it was too expensive, and he knew that the money Emily and Charlotte put into their pockets, his pockets, was only gold and silver paper. I don't think we shall ever have a house, said Mr. Plantagenet. One will come, sang Bertie. How do you know? asked Mr. Plantagenet. Bertie could not say how she knew. The thought of it rattled in her head with the thought of that tiny raffia hat that Emily had now found for her. It was no bigger than a half-crown, and Emily had fixed in it a feather from her aunt's canary. Remembering that, Bertie suddenly remembered what she had thought about the house. Emily fixed the hat, she said. Someone will fix the house. Of course, there were doll houses advertised in the newspaper, even sometimes in part of the newspaper Emily cut up for Mr. Plantagenet. Doll's house for sale, 4 rooms, fully furnished, electric light, loggia, garage with miniature cars. But that's an enormous heap of money, said Charlotte. But I don't want electric light, said Mr. Plantagenet. A little pretending candlestick would do for me, and I wouldn't know how to drive any kind of car. But even the plain dolls' houses, 4 rooms, 2 rooms, some furniture, were 7 or 8 or 3, even 4 guineas each, and neither Emily and Charlotte nor their father had that much money to spare. We shall never get one, said Mr. Plantagenet. At the moment the Plantagenets were as uncomfortable as anyone in London. They had to live crowded together in 2 shoe boxes that were cramped and cold, and that could not shut. When they hung their washing out to dry, even the smallest pattern duster, it made the cardboard sodden and damp. You can't play with them properly, wailed Charlotte. It doesn't feel like home, said Mr. Plantagenet. Though, of course, it was ever so much nicer than the toy cupboard, he added hastily. But I'm too heavy for it. And so is Apple. It doesn't feel safe. I don't mind it, said Bertie. But then Bertie, aggravating creature, never minded anything. She was happy anywhere. It slips about. Everybody knocks it over. It doesn't feel safe, said Mr. Plantagenet. Long, long ago, began Toddy in her comforting voice, and it is the best wood that gives out the most comforting voice. Ask the men who make pianos and violins and flutes. Long, long ago, I knew a doll's house. I lived in it. It belonged to Laura. She was Emily and Charlotte's great-great aunt. That was 100 years ago, said Toddy. Toddy had stayed the same all that time, for all that 100 years. Does that surprise you? It is easier for dolls than children. From the moment they are made, and finished, they never have to alter, they never have to grow. I wouldn't be a child for anything, Toddy often said. First, you have to be a baby, then a little child, then a bigger child, then a schoolboy or girl, and then a big boy or girl, then grow up. Of course, Toddy knew she could not. Even if she would, there was no power of growing in dolls. And she knew that was why, for instance, any live little girl, however stupid, had power over her. I am as I am, said wise little Toddy. I couldn't be all those things. In all these years, these 100 years, I can still only be me. It is very important for dolls that children guess their right ages. Some thoughtless children make their dolls vary between 6 and 6 months. Mr. Plantagenet, for instance, was born 28 years old. Toddy was about 7. Apple would always be 3. Darner was so cross that it was easy to guess he was old. Bertie was more difficult. It was her flightiness, but even Bertie was easily seen to be between 20 and 30. I was telling you about the doll's house, said Toddy. It was not so big. It could stand comfortably on the table, and outside it was a glossy cream color painted with ivy. It looked as good as real ivy, said Toddy. It would be better than real ivy, said Mr. Plantagenet. Real ivy chokes things and can even pull down a house. Painted ivy is safer. I like painted ivy. Go on. Go on, go on, cried Apple. Emily had put him on a chair, but he had deliberately fallen off upside down because he wanted to practice standing on his head. Don't do that, Apple dear, said Toddy. The doll's house? Oh, yes. In the front there was a front door with steps leading up to it. How many steps? 6, said Toddy. And the door was painted green with a knocker. It didn't really open, but that didn't matter because the whole of the front swung open, leaving the inside ready to be played with. Leaving the steps? Asked Mr. Plantagenet anxiously. Leaving the steps, nodded Toddy, and she added, remembering, on the steps was fixed a little tiny scraper. Would my foot go on it? Asked Apple. My foot in its red shoe? Perfectly, said Toddy. And yours, she said to Mr. Plantagenet before he need ask. There was a kennel, she said, just outside. For Darner? Asked Apple. But would he go in it? Asked Mr. Plantagenet doubtfully. In this kennel I think he would, said Toddy. Darner did not growl as he would have it. He had thought the kennel was dangerous. He always growled, "Brr, a danger." There was a hall with a staircase and a polished wooden floor. I remember the floor particularly, said Toddy, because it looked like a draught board. Draughts is a game you play on a board, checked in squares of light and dark wood, she explained to Apple. The walls of the hall were red paper, she said, that looked like satin. Are you sure it did? Asked Mr. Plantagenet doubtfully. I haven't seen any paper like that. You would have once, said Toddy. I'm quite certain. I remember it looked cozy and rich. There was a hall window with lace curtains. The white looked pretty on the red. There were Christmas scraps for pictures and a clock glued on the wall and two dolls' house, dark wood chairs, and a tiny rug. Everything, said Mr. Plantagenet. Everything. And in the hall, said Toddy, was the figure of a butler. No one asked her why she said the figure of a butler instead of a butler. They knew that whoever had made or tried to make that butler had not been successful. There were some dolls like that. There was no need to pity him because he never had been a butler. We could put him outside, said Mr. Plantagenet. Go on. To the left was the kitchen, Toddy went on. You know which the left is, Apple? Your left hand, the one you don't shake hands with, on the left. Then was the kitchen. What was it like? What was it like? What was it like? There was a blue tin stove with saucepans and a kettle. There was a heavy iron on the stand. no bigger than Emily's fingernail. There was a rolling pin and a wooden pudding basin smaller than a thimble. There was a dresser with flowered china cups and plates on it, a table and another rug and kitchen chairs and a mangle and a pot of pretending geraniums on the windowsill. "Oh dear," said Mr. Plantagenet longingly. Up to now the thought of the house and the thought of her hat had been knocking together in Bertie's head. Now she asked, "Was there a little feather broom?" "I think there was," said Toddy. "Dear," said Bertie, and the feather broom and the duster and her hat seemed to float before her eyes. "Could you make buns for tea in that kitchen?" asked Apple. "What is a bun?" "To the right of the hall," said Toddy. "You know your right hand, Apple dear, the one you do shake hands with? To the right was the sitting room. It had a green carpet," said Toddy, "the color of holly leaves, and it had real wallpaper, like the hall, only this one was white with cream stripes. On the wallpaper were two little pictures. Their frames were made of glued-on shells that Laura had picked up at the seaside. There was another window." "Did it open?" "No, it didn't open, but it had lace curtains too, and there was a fireplace and a fire of shining red gelatin paper. There was a sofa covered in red velvet and two chairs to match and a table and a piano. Its notes were paper notes glued on. On the table," said Toddy slowly, "was a lamp with a white china shade. It would really light if you used a birthday cake candle." "We should have to be careful of Apple with that candle," said Bertie suddenly, and they all stared at her because that was such an unusually clear thing for Bertie to say. "You're right to be afraid of fire," said Toddy. "You are celluloid, Bertie, and that would flare up in an instant if you went anywhere near fire." "You would, you know," said Mr. Plantagenet. "Better not go near the candle, Bertie." "I?" asked Bertie, surprised. "I was thinking of Apple." "Also on the table," said Toddy, "there was a vase of wax roses. They were mottled in wax, and they were no bigger than a thimble." "Like the pudding basin?" murmured Mr. Plantagenet. "Yes," said Toddy, "and in the sitting room there was a golden cage, and inside the cage was a bird." "A bird?" asked Bertie. "Aha! Did it sing?" "No, it couldn't sing," said Toddy, "but it was there." It could sing," said Bertie, and her eyes seemed to shine. "I know how to sing." Scraps and pieces of all the songs she had ever heard knocked together gently in her head with bird songs. Chiefly Sparrow because she had heard little else. Being a London doll, she would not sing any one of them, but they all ran together and seemed to make a chain of song in her head, such as might be sung by a bright toy bird. "Aha!" sighed Bertie. Music, delicate clockwork musical box music, was what Bertie liked to hear. "Upstairs," said Toddy, "there were two bedrooms. One had a pink flannel carpet and one had a blue. There were beds with nick-bound blankets, and there was a white tan bath with taps, and there was a cot with bars." "Would it do for me?" asked Apple. "It would be a good fit," said Toddy gravely. "There was a jug and basin and a pail to match them for carrying the water downstairs." "Very thoughtful," said Mr. Plantagenet. "Did the taps on the bath really run?" "Yes, if you put water in the tank behind the bath," said Toddy. Mr. Plantagenet nodded. Apple was thinking about the cot. Bertie was thinking about the bird in the bird cage. "Occupied, of course," said Mr. Plantagenet suddenly. "Occupied?" asked Toddy. "I mean, there are other dolls living in it, of course." It was a long time ago, said Toddy. Maybe it has gone, been sold or broken up. I don't know where it is now, said Toddy sadly. That Laura, great Aunt Laura, had a little girl, but the little girl is a great aunt herself now. Why, she is Emily and Charlotte's great aunt. Maybe she has given it away or given it up. I don't know. But dolls lived in it then, said Mr. Plantagenet. You lived in it once. Did other dolls live there with you? Don't you remember them? I remember one, said Toddy slowly. Yes, I remember her, said Toddy very, very slowly. Why do you say it like that? What was her name? Her name was Marchpane. What a funny name. What does it mean? Marchpane is a heavy, sweet, sticky, snuff-like almond icing. Very old-fashioned, said Toddy. You very quickly have enough of it. It was a good name for her, said Toddy slowly. But what was she like? Asked Mr. Plantagenet. What was she like? Asked Bertie. What was she like? Asked Apple. She was valuable, said Toddy. She was little and heavy. What was she made of? I'm made of celluloid, said Bertie, and celluloid knocked in her head against other words like it, cellophane, cellular, celliclines. Now she did not know which she was made of, but any of them seemed to describe her well. I like you to be made of celluloid, said Mr. Plantagenet quickly, as if he were afraid that what Toddy said might hurt Bertie, but Bertie did not mind. Marchpane was made of kid and china, said Toddy. Kid? What is kid? It's a kind of leather, white leather, said Toddy. Her body was made of it and stuffed with sawdust and jointed. Her joints worked more smoothly than mine. Her head was china, and her eyes were china too. Her hair was real in a plait that was pinned around her head. You could plait it and unplait it. Was it yellow? Asked Bertie. Yes, said Toddy mournfully. Is there much difference between real and unreal? I wouldn't know, said Bertie. Well, yes, said Toddy as gently as she could. Did her clothes take on and off? Asked Apple, who hated to have his clothes taken off. She was in a wedding dress, wedding clothes, said Toddy. They took off and they were all white. White? I shouldn't like that, said Bertie more cheerfully. I like pink and red and yellow and blue. But they were beautiful. They were stitched with tiny feather stitching. Is there a stitch called feather stitching? Oh, I should like that, said Bertie, forgetting Marchpane. And they were edged with the narrowest real lace. Prick, said Darner suddenly. They looked at him with surprise. They all looked around for the danger and could not see any. Were those curtains real lace curtains? Asked Mr. Plantagenet. Those curtains in the house? I shouldn't suppose so, said Toddy. Real lace is very expensive. If it were my house, said Mr. Plantagenet, I should have real lace curtains, nothing less, said Mr. Plantagenet firmly. Think, to live in a house like that. His eyes, that Emily now kept quite free from dust, shone, being glass, they shone quite easily. Not to live in a shoebox any more. His voice changed as he said that. He sounded as if he were shut in that dark toy cupboard again. I could get out of my cot, said Apple suddenly. I would. I could climb through the bars, and Emily and Charlotte would think I had rolled out. Bertie was thinking about the bird, her songs, her hat, its feather stitching, the feather broom. And when they had finished playing with us, said Mr. Plantagenet, they would shut up the front and we could be alone, quite private in our own house. Yes, said Toddy, I had forgotten how good that can be. She had forgotten Marchpane as well.